Truthspresso, episode 126.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truthspresso with Daniel Minnick.
Hello there, Truthspresso fans. This is Daniel Minnick, your host for Truthspresso, and this is another episode of Truthspresso Express. And this episode, I am recording on Monday, September 20th. This is slated to be released Wednesday, the 22nd. But this day is a special day because it is when the booster shots for COVID vaccines are approved politically to start being distributed. And I was reading some articles the last two nights talking about the effectiveness of vaccines and the boosters, and so I'm going to tie those two together, and I will have the links to the articles in the show notes. So remember, as I am driving to work, which is what I'm doing for Truthspresso Express, I'm either driving to work or from work. In this case, this is the morning and I'm driving to work. And so I'm not going to be able to be reading from an article. I will be citing the articles in the show notes, but I'm not going to be reading from them because I can't read while I'm driving. So, one of the articles that I found, was reading last night, had to do with the idea that new data, new studies were showing that the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines were waning. The article then tried to claim that this made the case for booster shots. It's hard for me to believe that the major news sources are not, in some ways funded by companies that have interests, in selling these booster shots to the government, because everything's said to be free, but it's not free. We're paying indirectly through taxes and so on. But so this article I was reading from Mercury News, it talked about how the effectiveness, like new data, new studies, were showing that the effectiveness of the COVID vaccines were waning, and this made the case for booster shots. Well, I'm not a virologist or an epidemiologist or an anything-ologist, so I can't speak to that from a professional standpoint, but I would kind of think, beg to differ in there, if something is proving not to be as effective as you thought, is the answer really to keep pushing more of it? And, you think with each shot, the effectiveness could wane more quickly, or, and then there's the idea that, well, if you're putting foreign things in your body, with every shot, you're going to be increasing chances that your body might have an adverse reaction, and you might be reporting that to VAERS, VAERS. But so, yeah, this isn't the only article. It's not a standout article. I was looking for other articles, and there are plenty of mainstream news articles talking about the effectiveness of the vaccines waning. And, so a lot of them are talking about the fact that the Moderna vaccine is more effective than the Pfizer one. Now, then, of course, it starts to make you question, well, why was the Pfizer one the one approved by the FDA? And we'll talk about that a little bit. But, the Moderna one that is still under emergency authorization use, the Pfizer, I'm going to say that a lot of people are taking the version of it that's still emergency authorized use, and not the version of it that is officially approved by the FDA. But okay, of course, as I read the article, Dr. Anthony Fauci makes an appearance. He's always the expert on everything, even though what he says has to keep changing, and, but yes, he's not God. He doesn't know everything, but then still, why do we have to hang on every word that he says when, he's constantly wrong, constantly having to change? But his changing viewpoints are so much better than anyone else's changing viewpoints, right? So Fauci said something to the fact that you don't want to have to keep playing catch up. You want to be ahead of the curve or something like that. So he's giving the nod to the booster shots. Why am I not surprised? Is there anything about Fauci at this point that doesn't just toe the narrative and toe anything that involves a top-down government solution? Because he's a bureaucrat and all that, and it seems like anything you can conceive of that would just be, is this more inconvenient? Does this require more money to be thrown at a solution? Is it just more is better? It's always more this and more that from government mandates, double masks and so on. It's just always more is better. So Fauci encouraged booster shots. But remember that today, September 20th, is the day that boosters start to go into circulation, or they're starting to be made available from different locations, despite being publicly approved by the FDA. So I was also looking at another article that talked about how the FDA approved booster shots. Well, not technically. Of course, earlier on, articles would say that the FDA disapproved booster shots. I think it was a vote of 16-2, the panel. Now, remember, a few weeks ago, or was it 2 weeks ago? I forget. My wife and I did an episode where part of the episode talked about two higher-ups in the FDA and their vaccine research division, whatever it was called. They were kind of getting frustrated at the political pressure from the Biden administration to approve boosters for the general public by September 20th. They figured the time frame was way too short. There was too much political motivation, and so they retired from the FDA. But it's obvious that they didn't just figure, oh, we've been here long enough, it's time to retire, we've done our business. No, it was more of a political retirement. They did not want to bow to the pressure to rubber stamp something that they did not feel was adequately tested, and I would applaud them for that. So, but now there are a lot of articles talking about how the FDA approved the boosters, but the FDA voted 16-2 not to approve booster shots, the third shots, or in the case of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the second shot for the general public, but they only approved it for those who are very at risk of having severe complications from COVID, and those who are 65 and older who believe that there's less risk in taking the booster than in catching COVID and having severe side effects, and they have comorbidities and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes sense, and it should be a personal choice, as I believe, but that's what the FDA approved. And of course, articles that the headlines, if they're going to say that the FDA approves boosters, and they want the general public to start getting them, even though the FDA strongly disapproved of the idea of approving boosters, at least at this junction, and just merely approved of, kind of for very very edge cases of those who figured, what do I have to lose? Let's take this. There's probably less risk in a third shot than getting COVID, with comorbidities and stuff like that. So, yeah, that makes more sense. So it was an overwhelming vote, 16-2 tally, that only those most at risk, 65 and older, are approved. So if you just read articles now that just say FDA approved booster shots, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Now, back to the original article, the waning effects of the vaccines. And I do remember months ago seeing articles that were talking about how the vaccine effectiveness could start to wane, but there is also the idea that the vaccines were a panacea of curing COVID, and so the pressure was on people, just if we all just get vaccinated, we'll end this. Remember all those commercials, like showing the graduation in reverse, all these different events going back in reverse, kind of like the idea of the promise of returning to normal finally after being exhausted over all this pandemic and all the government-induced lockdowns and government-induced mask mandates and government-induced solutions to everything, that then we can get a government-approved, soon-to-be government-mandated vaccine, and showing everything going in reverse and saying, like, we've got one shot at bringing things back to normal, one shot, and showing people smiling, all these smiling faces, because they got the little shot, and now, hey, that's all you got to do is your little shot, your little pinch of incense, as it were, and we can go back to normal. But you don't see that much anymore, because now it's not one shot. It could say we've got our shots and shots and shots to get things back to normal-ish, or continued shots. And so, yeah. So the first article I was reading talked about waning effectiveness, and what is that all about? There are several studies, and it seems that as the studies have been going on about the effectiveness of the mRNA vaccines, that they're very temporary, the effectiveness, and it's kind of like radioactive substances, that the half-life of them wanes after several months, and then the half-life of that, so it kind of makes you think, no, I'm not saying that they're radioactive stuff, okay? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? But so the effectiveness waning, and apparently Moderna's effectiveness doesn't wane as much as the Pfizer one. But remember, the Pfizer one was the one that was approved by the FDA. I mean, not, if you read about the Pfizer one being approved by the FDA, there's a little bit of nuance to that. Now, I want to present that in the least conspiracy way I could possibly do that. Because I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am very anti-state, okay? I'm very skeptical about anything that the government, pushes on people to be, or any kind of government solution to be a real solution. I think even if it is, we should always question it, because if the government wants to push something, you should always question it, okay? But, so the Pfizer vaccine was the one that was approved, and this is the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccine. But if you look at what the FDA says that they approved, what they approved is officially called the Pfizer Comirnaty vaccine. Now, I'm not saying that what the FDA approved is significantly different from what is being distributed. It could technically be the same thing, because I remember reading it said that the FDA said that it's technically, you could technically replace one product for the other, but they're at least labeled as different products. The BioNTech vaccine that was approved for emergency authorization use, and the Comirnaty, which is the one that the FDA has officially approved. So, when it comes to Pfizer, if you're getting Comirnaty, at least in some legal sense, if you're taking the FDA approved one, then you might have a little more legal clout to sue if you have complications. Say if you are someone who would have to put in some serious complication into the VAERS system, you could have more standing to sue if it's Comirnaty. Now, if you took the Pfizer vaccine thinking that it's the one that's approved by the FDA, but you don't see Comirnaty on the label of the vaccine, then what you're taking is the version of the product that's still being distributed under the emergency authorization, and basically you're still the test subject, and you're essentially agreeing that you can't sue over complications because it's the emergency authorization, not the FDA approved one for distribution to the public, in which you now have legal clout to sue. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm not saying that the two are different vaccines, they're just different labeled products. Maybe there's a difference, maybe there's not. That's irrelevant, essentially, because the whole point is, if you want the FDA approved thing, if you're getting this Pfizer vaccine because it was FDA approved, if you want the legal backing, if the government's going to honor that, if you want any legal standing for potentially suing if you got complications from it, then you want the one that's labeled Comirnaty, because that's the one that's the officially labeled Pfizer version of BioNTech that was approved by the FDA, and not the emergency authorization one. But all that said, the Pfizer one, so the latest study, there's been several studies, and I think it was the Moderna one that loses its effectiveness down to 76%, but the Pfizer one loses its effectiveness down to as low as 42% effective. That doesn't sound like the polio vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine, the measles, the mumps, and typhoid, and all that other stuff that's made using the traditional method of having a inactive or dead version of the virus, and your body understands the entire virus and builds up immunity. Like how many of us are taking jab after jab of a polio vaccine? Maybe we need a booster shot every several months to protect us against polio, but you still read, if you see the arguments on social media, still people, when someone poses any question or challenge or posts any meme against, making fun of the push for the COVID vaccines, they trot out the polio thing. and say, oh, yeah, like, okay, there was a push for polio vaccines and we got rid of polio. Well, even articles now are pretty much saying we're not going to get rid of COVID. All we're doing is trying to jab, and keep people alive and keep them from, there's a reduced possibility that you might require a hospitalization, or you might die from the COVID if you take at least 3 jabs from this. And we might, the article does say that we might need more shots. And why am I not surprised with this mRNA technology? So Pfizer down to 42%, but how many people are still getting it? And remember, remember back at the vice presidential debate when it was, what's his name? Pence, Mike Pence, and Kamala Harris, and the question, of course, at this time, since Trump was president and you had the Operation Warp Speed trying to get these vaccines out, the Democrats were kind of laughing about it, and they, or Kamala was asked about, would you take a vaccine? And she basically said, I wouldn't trust a vaccine that came from Trump. Well, that's still what's being distributed, are vaccines that came from Trump's presidency. And so, yeah, and now President Joe Biden has said that he's losing patience with the unvaccinated. He said it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Not taking vaccines that came from Trump, yeah. So he's losing patience with people. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We see all these articles talking about how the hospitals are getting overwhelmed with people all the unvaccinated, dying or being close to death, and loading up the hospitals and taking beds away from the vaccinated who might have other issues. And, remember gunshot victims and those taking overdosing on ivermectin, that fake news article from last week? Yeah, so that's all the talk, but, I don't think that's really the truth, because we also have these articles talking about the vaccines losing their effectiveness. And I saw in this article saying about the anticipation of the trajectory being that, what we're seeing about the waning effectiveness continues, we're going to see a lot more breakthrough hospitalizations and breakthrough deaths. Yes, they said it. Deaths from people getting vaccinated. But yet, Biden's losing his patience at the unvaccinated. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. But he didn't say anything about Pfizer and 42% effectiveness. No, that's not politically correct for a vaccine mandate. But yeah, there was a doctor, an immunologist, who said something to the effect that at the end of the article, he's trying to encourage, boosters, and, we might need more shots in the future, but he also talked about the trajectory of the effectiveness waning and more breakthrough cases, breakthrough hospitalizations, and breakthrough deaths, yes. And then said, well, as we get more shots, every time you get reinfected with the disease, or, you get another shot, your immune system is basically reevaluating what to do with what's coming in. How much should I really produce more antibodies? So I predict that we're going to see in the future the effectiveness of these jabs waning even more. And even as it will become undeniable that the hospitals, if they're getting overwhelmed, will start to get overwhelmed with people having adverse reactions to the vaccine, those and people who get COVID and have complications with COVID, either not due to the vaccine not being effective against it, or to these vaccines causing problems, and the COVID treats it as a comorbidity, and you have complications, and COVID has a feast day with that. And so, but those who don't want to fall in line with the narrative, those who don't want to get vaccinated, they're the ones who are somehow, going to get to blame for all that. Yeah, so look forward to more of that, and then maybe more new vaccines or calls for, it is the duty of everyone in the world to get their quarterly jab for the rest of their life to protect themselves from this pandemic. Well, I just parked. And so, yes, do read the articles. I'll have links to them in the show notes. And stay tuned for more exciting episodes of Truthspresso and Truthspresso Express.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.